On Monday, the country will mark 9 years since the Marikana Massacre, one of the deadliest chapters in the story of democratic South Africa. More than 30 mine workers were shot dead when police tried to remove them from a koppie where they gathered for days in a protest over wages at what was then Lonmin Platinum Mine. 10 other people, including 2 security officers and police, were killed that week. To date, there are still demands for justice and compensation for those who lost loved ones and the survivors. To talk more on this, we're joined by former Northwest SAPS spokesperson Thulani Ngubane, senior correspondent at African News Agency Jonisai Maromo, and Nomzamo Zondo, who is the executive director of Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa. Good evening to you all, and thank you so much for your time tonight. I'll begin with you, Jonisai. You were there in the lead-up even to what then became one of the most shocking days in the country's history. Talk to us about what made this protest different, that you decided, as you were dispatched by your editor then, to head to the Northwest.
Good day, Bongiwe, and good day to your viewers and listeners. I think the Marikana Massacre in August 2012 should be remembered in the context of the violence which is inherent in the mining sector. Even now, after the 2012 incident, we continue to hear of people being killed in the mines. So when there was this unrest in Marikana in 2012, I was with the South African Press Association, SAP at that time. They decided to send me to Marikana with other SAPA reporters. It was a very violent protest. So for editors, it was very interesting that we bring them the updates from Rustenburg there in the Marikana, the township there. And what we saw there, it was a very violent scene because, as you correctly pointed out, before the August 16, 10 people had been killed. So it was a very interesting story which had the interest of all the editors in the country, and all media houses and even international media was represented at Rustenburg at the time. And we saw that the story was also making headlines globally.
And Thulani, for you, I mean, you were tasked with one of the most difficult jobs, speaking for police at the time. Talk to us about the assessment at the time. Did you know, as the police, that things were going to take a turn like we then saw on the 16th?
No, thanks, Makhumalo. I would say not necessarily. Whatever that happened on the day that saw the dark cloud that engulfed our nation, it was not something that was preempted, and it was not something that was planned. It was of our understanding at the time that, look, we are dealing with South Africans and we are dealing with human beings, and at some point they should be able to cooperate when the rule of law is laid bare before them to say, look, this is the situation we're facing with, and it is not in accordance with the laws of the Republic to have people sitting on the koppie for the number of days that they were sitting, and something had to give. And unfortunately, what happened was not exactly what one would have anticipated or even dreamt of a day before the unfortunate scene.
Nomzamo, when you look at, the moment that became the Marikana Massacre, which we still know it as such right now, it's one of those that is unforgettable, and particularly for your clients who are still trying to piece together what really happened.
Look, I think that's the difficulty, right? I think our clients have from the beginning decided they're going to pursue the truth. And I think in 2015, when the Commission of Inquiry's report came out, we knew that it would still be a very long road. And I'm surprised listening to my co-panelists speak to what happened on that day, because for many of the families, I remember how they recall how they could see on the TV people saying, so many people have died in Marikana, and they wondered, where is my husband, where is my brother, where is my son? And to realize that they were part of that. And even this idea of violence, right? Because in the reporting about the strike before Marikana, and even the few days after the massacre, there was this big news about the strike was so violent. But if you look at the 10 deaths that happened, right, you have maybe 2 incidents, right, that are happening in a public platform. That's the confrontation between Nom and the miners. And then there's the confrontation, which is on anyone's narrative, caused by the police on the 13th of August, which saw 5 people die. And then you have very separate in private incidents where people did die, but you can't then express it as violence. You can't then, and that's the problem why I feel like we sit here today, is because every time people talk about Marikana, they talk about violence, as if there was this general violence that was everywhere in the copy. But what we saw in the pictures, we saw thousands of men sitting on a mountain, and then hours later, we saw many of them die. Not because one of them had shot at the police, not because one of them had attacked the police, but because the police had started that day with an intention to end the struggle.
Now, Nomzamo, I mean, one of the things that one really should look into here is that on the 13th of August, you have a woman like Mam Merilanga, who's also still trying to piece together what happened to her husband on the 13th. And for her, it is the violence that she talks about, because her husband was stabbed 18 times. And it's still unknown even to this day who killed him in the morning. That would then see police officers being killed, that would see, Ubabso Kanyile being killed even later on in the day. So that is the characteristics that some use to say that it was violent, because if you have someone being stabbed 18 times in the morning going to work and it's still unknown who did that, surely that can be seen in a violent context.
Well, look, I'm not denying there was violence in Marikana, but the reality is, for everyone who lives in any part of South Africa, there is violence, right? That does not then tell us that we should engage with them first through that lens of violence. Because you're right to say, Utatulanga, he was killed on the morning of the 13th. We don't know who killed him, but we know that the 3,000 men who were on that copy, it is impossible that even half of them were involved in his killing, that even 90% of them were involved in his killing. What we know is that probably a fraction of them are possibly linked to his killing. But it's impossible then say, we look at the 3,000 men and say, because there's one person who died on the road somewhere 3 days before, then we see you as violent. That's really what my complaint is.
And Johnny Sai, for you, as a journalist, you are now trying to get information as to what exactly is going on here. How easy was it for you to understand what was happening? Because as Nomzamo says, there were a lot of people who were saying, no, don't characterize the men on the copy as violent. Others were saying, but tell us what is going on here. Is it a labor dispute? What exactly is happening? Because I remember at the time, we were all still trying to understand what this strike was all about. How easy was it for you as a journalist to know what was behind this?
Thank you, Bongiwe. I remember sitting with you at the Marikana Commission of Inquiry, I think for about 2 years. We left that commission none the wiser, I think, because there was this characterization of the protest. Was it just an issue of labor, or did it become something else? And for all those experts who were brought in, the witnesses, still even the Falam with the report, we asked, I'm sure you still have questions on, okay, what was the issue? Because even now, there is what continues to be the ghost of Marikana, if I'm to put it in that way, because nobody really knows. It hasn't been clarified to say, okay, it was a matter of labor, and then there was a dispute, because it's a matter of who are you listening to? Both sides in this area, the police, their members were killed, and that also has to be underlined. The law enforcement officers, the security officers, and the non-protesting mine workers, they were killed as well. So these 34 people were killed on the 16th of August. It became a matter, I think it was the peak, but the killings had been going on. I was there in Marikana in the lead up to the August 16, and we would see bodies at Marikana. You know, when these men gather, we would hear that this one was an impi, and a good one also, these names were used there. And then we saw bodies, I saw bodies. So we have not come to the conclusion of what happened at Marikana, and even the pursuit of justice by the families, Bongiwe. The families were not asking for money. They were asking for justice. Say, want to know what happened to our relatives. There has been that court process to say, let's find the truth. And even those police officers who were killed as well, their families, they were breadwinners for their family. We had that at the commission there for 2 years. Their families were in tears to say, look, that was the breadwinner. They were fathers and they were killed, the security officers. So the issue of settling the Marikana issue, I'm sure South Africa is still a long way to settle that matter, even if there is talk of government paying the victims. But justice, if it's delayed, some say it can be it can be sought by any other means, because since 2012, now it's 9 years, or almost nine years, and there isn't that justice.
And Thulani, you know, on the issue of communication, this was very critical. What became of communication at that time? What were the conversations that were taking place behind closed doors for the SAPS in order for us to know and understand what was going on at the time? Were you able to decipher that this was a labor dispute and communicate as such?
Yeah, indeed, Makhumalo, there are two elements to this. One, it's a labor dispute as we know it, of the 12,500 demand. But there was also an unfortunate scenario of a tug-of-war between the two unions, which I think is what made us to see the escalating death as we were building up to the tragic day. Because NUM and AMCU, there was a contestation of the space within the mine itself, and that is why then you ended up seeing some of the people who would just mysteriously die either on their way to work, because there was a question of who must now dominate as a labor union between AMCU and NUM. And I think that confrontation as well saw itself right in the eyes and the hands of the mine workers, where they were attacking each other because some were on strike and some were believing that as per the union that was a leader at the time, which was NUM, people believe that we have our right to go to work. We are not affiliates of the new union. So there are these two issues that were very prominent at the time, and unfortunately, as a tragedy that it is, it saw itself, unfortunately, coming out with the police at the end. Fairly, for me, Marikana and what we had always said, Marikana was a labor issue that did not need to get the police to where they ended up, as they end up being at the center of this whole situation. But unfortunately, I think the management of the situation is what let everybody down. But I don't think really it needed any police interference if, from a labor's point of view, it was managed correctly.
And Nomzamo, at the back of that, a labor dispute gone wrong, which did not need police to get involved in. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Look, our clients, many of them are from the rural Eastern Cape, from Lesotho, some of them are from Northwest. And their biggest complaint has been how, for them, they've always understood the police as their protectors. And they said quite early on, before the commission started saying, we don't understand why the police had to get involved. This is between our husbands and the mine. And the one thing, I mean, is there isn't this whole what's hidden here is not what the issue. We know that the issue was the demand for 12.5, and we know that that demand had been discussed with the mine even before August 2012. What has been hidden is the reason why the police intervened, and what's also been hidden is who are the people who are the decision makers in pushing us to a point where we had a massacre post-apartheid. That's what's been hidden. And I also want to go back to this issue about the fight between AMCU and NUM. If you look at the events of that week in August, if you look at the role of who are the leaders of the strike, in fact, if you look at the fact that even the clients they will represent, at least 14 of them of the people that were killed were members of NUM. It tells you that this actually wasn't a fight about who gets majority representation within London. In fact, even within the commission, both Odatu Matundwa and Babu Zokwana, they came and gave evidence in the commission, and you could see their different roles. That strike wasn't about a contestation of who takes power. It was about mainly youth coming up and saying, actually, we want to set the value of our labor, and we believe that we can do that. And in fact, one of the key themes and things at the bottom is that we don't want unions involved in this issue. We want to talk to the employer directly. Initially as rock drill operators, we want to talk to the employer and make sure that our wages are up to standard with all the other mines that are in the region. It wasn't about a fight between NUM and AMCU. But of course, in the days before and after the massacre, that became a place where we could focus on instead of actually going to ask the key question: why is the state getting involved here, and why are they standing with capital?
We continue our conversation with former Northwest SAPS spokesperson Thulani Ngubane, senior correspondent at African news agency Jonisai Maromo, and Nomzamo Zondo, who is the executive director at Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa. Thank you so much for all of you, to all of you, for staying on with us. Thulani, if I can come back to you, when we saw the shooting happening live on television, South Africa and the world were really shocked by what was unfolding, but journalists were even left dumbfounded by what happened then afterwards. There appeared to have been a blackout of some sort because we could not be able to get information to understand what exactly had just happened, where did it come from, and all of that. Was that deliberate on the side of the SAPS in terms of communication?
No, it was not, Makhumalo, as I always try to avoid the word massacre and refer to this as a tragedy. It's because everything had just unfolded and everybody was trying to wire their heads around what had happened at the time. So without trying to curtail or hide anything, it is normal that you take a back step, you think, because this is a big situation that would even need the head of state to either maybe be the one who comes up and say, look, the escalation levels of communicating the situation had really gone to levels that were beyond some of us at our levels, and maybe say to us as a province, but also to us as the police itself, because it was now just at the heat of the moment, and anyone who would have came up to say anything, surely it would have not been properly thought and properly processed. So it was just a situation of the moment, and that matters had just escalated too quickly.
And Jonisai, that was one of the frustration then, to be able to get information as to what is happening. I remember getting to Marikana and finding, names that were put outside a caravan. You would see that as a family member, on one side, if they're on this list, it means they're in hospital. On this other list, they're unaccounted for. On another list, they could be potentially elsewhere. Was it as frustrating for you on the ground trying to piece together what had just happened?
Indeed, Bongiwe, it was deeply frustrating a moment for journalists who were at Marikana, because remember, people had died. And then there were many, if not hundreds, who have been arrested as well. So we didn't know whether a person is dead, if they are missing, whether they are dead or they are with the South African Police Service. So it was a very frustrating moment, because there were also families who were searching, and they also searched through the media, say, help me find my father, he is missing. And we did not know where to start as the media, because, of course, the police tried to formulate their messaging as they would in a crisis. But remember, this was live on television. The shooting was live it was on social media. It was on different platforms across the world. So what we were seeking was how many people are dead. But the moment of the people being shot and dying, it was recorded live. So it compounded the situation, because we could see that people are dying, but who died, we didn't know. For some time, that blackout that we spoke of, it was worsened because people had seen that the death has happened. And I remember rushing back to Marikana, but there was no clear or articulate information. As Thulani says, maybe they're waiting for a higher authority to expound, to explain the situation which had happened. But the problem was the people had seen already what had happened at Marikana. And also, just on that matter, what came from the SAPS as well, after the shooting of the August 12th, we remember that infamous statements by the then police commissioner saying all we did was our job. It was the best of responsible policing. So it was difficult for a journalist to get what the message is coming from SAPS. Are they remorseful, or they are saying we did our work and we're going to stick to that? Remember those infamous statements which became famous at the Marikana inquiry, where the then police commissioner said whatever happened represents the best of responsible policing. So we're trying to piece together, say, okay, now we've got the names, but what is the police stance in this? And it was quite a difficult moment to piece that together.
And Nomzamo, when you look at the difficulties that journalists would have had to try and piece together what was going on, we didn't know what was happening. It would have been difficult for you as well as those who were trying to get to assist the families to be getting information at that time.
Look, I mean, I think, of course, we were not even involved immediately after the massacre. We were approached days after, and by AMCO and people who were already concerned about ensuring justice for the massacre, people who end up forming the Marikana support campaign. So we were not involved at that time. We actually, I think AMCO was very useful for us in connecting us with individual family members. People in our legal team had to travel to the far-flung areas of the Eastern Cape, had to connect with people in Lesotho to make sure they spoke to each and every family that was affected, and then, of course, also make sure they're able to participate in the Commission of Inquiry.
And Thulani, when one looks at the statements that were then drafted post that, and you listen to one even before where we heard that today is D-Day. That was in the morning. When we heard from the provincial commissioner, today is D-Day, and even when she came in front of the commission, she still could not really tell us what D-Day meant. What really was it that went into this D-Day? Are you able to talk to us then 9 years later what she meant by D-Day? Because I'm sure a statement like that would have been passed through the communication channels.
Yeah, that's why, Makhumalo, I said from where I am sitting, I can assure you that whatever that happened on that particular day is never what was anticipated. The use of such words like D-Day, for us, D-Day would have meant it's the day that we try to stop all the chaos and we take people down from the mountain and make sure that we restore peace and order and stability in the area. But after what had happened, those words started to become like some words that we're anticipating that was yet to happen. Unfortunately, it's not what it was. The words simply meant that the police were going to try and make sure that on this particular day, the mayhem that we have seen, the chaos that we have seen, the killing of people, we were going to try and restore order and make sure that we put back Marikana, the Kopi, and the entire area into the control of the police. Those were not the words that were meant to say it's D-Day because of what ended up happening. And if that was to be a plan, surely those words were never going to come prior to the situation. It just shows that there was no such a plan to say at the end of the day, this is what is going to happen. It was, and when police goes into operations, sometimes the use of strong language or a language that seeks to affirm the message or the actions of the police without taking actions. Sometimes it's what we would normally use to say, look, today we will be hitting the dust. We will make sure that we leave no stone unturned. We'll make sure that whoever caused this mayhem or this crime, they are going to be arrested. It's normally the language that is used in policing circles, especially when you want to reinforce and emphasize a particular message. And unfortunately, this message was then used a day before the occurrence of something that sort of like would have been seen as an affirmation that says what had happened was exactly what maybe was planned, which is not true.
Nomzamo, as a final question from us tonight, let's look at the issue of compensation. Has all of that been ironed out? Because I know the injured and arrested miners are still saying that there are some who are outstanding.
Look, so the families received over 70 million in 2018. That is the money that the miners would have supported them with if they had not been murdered by the police. They are still negotiating with the state attorney and then the Ministry of Police specifically for compensation for the wrong that's been done to them. I know that the injured have not been compensated at this point. And that the arrested received, I think, over 20 million. And if we remember, the police arrested over 250 miners immediately after the massacre for killing the 34 that had been killed by the police. So it's those miners who received compensation. And I have to respond to this, Munguzon.
It's okay.
In as much as we can say that the D-Day was used at that moment to create fear, we have to look at the facts before that. We know that General Mbembe was so blood of the 13th. We know that General Mbombo spoke to Bernard Mokoena of Lonmin and said, we don't want to see 20 dead bodies here. We know that Bernard Mokoena, in that conversation, which is transcribed, is part of the records of the commission, said he's interested in snipers, right? Which tells us about the relationship between Lonmin and SAPS on this issue. And then we know that in the morning of the 16th, around 6:30, there were 4 mortuary vans ordered, right? That actually could carry 32 bodies. And in fact, we know that 31 people, 31 of the miners died there on that day. 1 died in a mortuary van, another 2 died in hospital. So we know that from everything that is objectively available, SAPS knew that it would kill some of my family's, of my clients' loved ones on that day.
All right. Thank you so much to you both, to you all, in fact, for your time. You know, this is really one of those stories that it needs a lot of answers. And as we try to then page through this book of history, we are then going to bring you different conversations here on Newzroom Afrika as we look back at what then became known as the Marikana Massacre. I have to thank you all for your time tonight. That was former Northwest SAPS spokesperson Tulani Ngubane, senior correspondent at African News Agency Jonisai Maromo, and Nomzamo Zondo, who is the executive director at the Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa.